Hello and welcome. Today I will be interviewing the authors of the influential SCA paper, often referred to as the Leaky Pipeline, formerly known as Representation of Women in SCA Rapier Awards Reveals Barriers to Progress and Increased Dropout Rates at All Levels. The paper reviews the important implications of recruitment, training, mentorship, and retention of female and other gender minorities in the SCA Rapier community. Thank you for coming to this panel where we shall discuss the background of this paper, the nature of its development, as well as future ideas. How this discussion panel will work: we will have a structured series of questions for the first portion of the interview, wherein I will be asking the panel prepared questions about their paper. After the series of structured questions, we will open the discussion panel up for Q&A session in this live event to ask the authors about their paper and ongoing research. We have some questions that have been sent in and others we will pick out from the chat. We will attempt to answer as many as we have time for, which is, well, what is even time? I will introduce our panelists today so they can give additional introductions if they would like. I am going to start with our first author on the paper, Donia Perrin de la Serena from the Kingdom of Atenveldt.
Hi, thank you, by the way, for organizing this. So what I wanted to say about myself is that I have a PhD in neuroscience. So I'm a doctor by training. That's why the title, the formal title is just so long and a mouthful. That's how I think, that's what I do. So I'm challenging myself to try to make this more accessible to everybody. And if I say something very sciencey, kind of, help me put it into terms that are more approachable.
I've got you covered.
Thank you. In my research, I study neurodevelopmental disorders. So right now I'm focused on cerebral palsy. And I've been part of a team that has actually found genetic contributions to cerebral palsy. So I feel like if I can find genes causing this disorder, I can find the fact that females are underrepresented. It was just a really obvious low-hanging fruit for me. I have a lot of experience with statistics. My day-to-day activity is comparing differences between two groups, trying to figure out what's different and what factors might be driving that from a really complex developmental brain background. So I'm working in bioinformatics, imaging, statistics. I work with patient and clinical data, and I've been branching out to survey studies as well as epidemiology. So I have a very broad background of scientific training.
That's great. We're super glad to have you, and thank you for being author number 1 on paper. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Master Illidor de Benegrain from the Kingdom of Atenveldt, currently in Atlantia, I believe.
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes.
I'm not sure after that how to follow it, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about me and my SCA career. I've been fencing for 20 years. I was the Premier Master of Defense of the West Kingdom. I got my white scarf 15 years ago, something like that. It's been a while, and I have been a part of the Order of Defense from the beginning, almost the very, very beginning.
Almost the very, very.
Well, I was not one of the first people named. That goes to Her Grace Duchess Dorinda. So I will say she is the first, who was the first person to get involved.
It is true. All right. Next up, we have Donia Marie de
Jarrell.
Oh, thank you so much. From Anstiora. Stellar Kingdom of Anstiora. Tell us about yourself.
So I'm Donia Marie de Jarrell from Anstiora. I've been a white scarf, let's see, before COVID, I think it was a year. What is time? I'm a premier of the Blade of Merit, which is Anstiora's newest grant order for martial combat for Rapier, and a founder of the Valkyrie company. So if you may have heard about that group, that was one of my brainchildren, and it's turned out to be a really beneficial group for a lot of us, including myself. And that's mainly my claim to fame. I started that group. Mundanely, I'm a project manager, so herding cats in productive directions is what I do 24/7.
Great, great. Thank you for being here. And the last but not least panelist, who has probably the coolest background of any of us, Bernanessa Sancha Galindo de Toledo from the Kingdom of Atenveldt. Welcome to us from sunny Arizona. Please introduce yourself.
I am Baroness Sancha, and I have been in the SCA since '98, and I have been fighting on and off from the beginning. For the past couple of years, been fighting very intensely, working on a lot of training. I am cadetted to Donia Perrin, and mundanely, I am an architect. I do a lot of commercial architecture, so definitely a lot about organization and coordinating lots of different players to get things built.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I am your moderator, Maestra Brega Mikumo. I am from Ontier or various other places. I live in Ontier right now, as you can see by the golden white checky. I am a Maestra of Defense, a white scarf, a bronze ring, and a Order of the Golden Rapier. So technically I'm the most decorated person in all of SCA fencing, which is a little weird, but, and I don't normally flex that brag, but since this is a discussion about awards, I felt it necessary to mention all of those things.
Do I get to mention mine? I totally forgot.
Oh, absolutely, because Donia, you and I are scroll sisters. Mistress Ari made both of our awesome scrolls in the same style. So go on.
Good taste, excellent taste. I've been a defender of the white scarf for 10 years. I'm the premier of our kingdom's new grant level award, the commander of the Link Stone for Rapier. And yeah, so I do Rapier as well. I run private practice training and also participate in HEMA.
Yay. Well, I feel like we are all well introduced. So I'm going to start right into this. We have some prepared questions, and I'm going to start with Illidor. What did you deserve? Starting over. What did you observe about the way people viewed female and other gender representations in the Master of Defense, and when did you begin to question this?
I would say I began to question it in the very first Penzic after the mods were made. So this would be August 2015, when I went to the mod meetup, and which is where the new mods got together with their +1s, and we all just sat together and we were talking, and I gave them, hey, I think there should be more women in the Masters of Defense. And the comment that I got was, point her out to me and we'll make sure she gets made. And at that point in time, yeah, really, like right to my face, I said to myself, all right, 5 years from now, we're going to talk. And that's what happened. So.
Yes. All right. When you began questioning these observations and you actually got more in depth with the data, did people feel there was still no problem that existed for women in our martial combat?
So as of late, so basically, I'll just kind of skip ahead a little bit. I started a spreadsheet that I originally had not planned to use to point out how terrible the percentages were for women in the Masters of Defense, but it just turned out that way because I just started collecting when everyone was made and the dates, and we had started the Excel spreadsheet. Let me rephrase, I did not start the Excel spreadsheet. Master Piero did, and a number of others helped. I then basically took it, organized it, and have basically been the keeper of the data ever since. Entirely because people let me. So I just, I took this on my own. I do have a few people that are also logged in, is able to edit and fix it as necessary, but the majority of the data collection has been me. So let me rephrase though, I do ask for assistance and people will tell me where I'm wrong, which is really the best part. And, no, seriously, right? Like they'll help me fix the data spreadsheet whenever I give it out. So at that, after a few months, I started giving the percentages of, basically for 5 years, about every quarter, I gave the percentages of how many mods we had, who were the kingdoms who had the most, and then I finally added the percentage of women Masters of Defense at the very end. And I never left any commentary for 5 years. And at the 5th year, on the anniversary of the mod for the 5th year, I decided I'd had enough, and I posted a very long post to the SCA Rapier page, because 5 years is more than enough time to take someone. We have had people who have gone from starting to mod in 5 years in that time. And why was it at this point in time that the representation of women in Rapier as in the mods, why was it still hovering around 13%? When we first started, after the first weekend, we had 33 people made the first weekend. No, sorry, 32 people made the first weekend. 4 of them were women. That's about 17%. It quickly went downhill after that. Our lowest number at one point, I believe, was around 11%. And now it's up to about 13, 14%. And it keeps hovering there and has stayed that way for basically 5 years.
Yeah, well, those people who don't think there's a problem don't like numbers, I guess.
You did have one more question of when I started finally saying to people, hey, this is our percentages, this is how it is, this is how bad it is, and explaining, at least from my point of view, of why this was a problem, I got basically dismissive. The response was basically along the lines of like, this is someone else's problem, this is not my fault, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, or even better, I'm going to keep doing what I was doing but harder. I'm going to do it harder and better. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, but harder and better. I'm like, okay. So, and that is when I met Perrin.
Awesome. How and why did you start collecting data on gender breakdown? I guess you said why, but how did you actually start doing this? Was it just the spreadsheet, or did you have anything more that you focused on?
I attempted to get some data on the percentage of women in practices, but I am not a data scientist, and the data that we got was not as useful as it could have been, and I basically was unable to do anything with it. I'll be honest, math is not, and statistics are not my strong suit. I asked them to graduate, but I've never did anything with them per se, exactly. I've done some qualitative and quantitative analysis, but the data that we received was not of the quality that could have been useful, or at least not to me.
All right. Well, so I guess I'm going to move over to Perrin then and say, why did you start analyzing female and other gender representations in Rapier Awards?
So I am a scientist in academic medicine, and that is a career field that has suffered very badly for equitable treatment of women and minorities. And there's been a whole lot of research showing just how beneficial it is to have a diverse pool of whatever. You're going to have more innovation, you're going to have better brainstorming and ideas, you're going to cover more ground, you're going to have more impact. And so academic medicine got their act together, and they're like, we have to fix this. And so the very first thing they did was they started tracking data. So what does this look like? What does this look like over time? What does this look like institution by institution? And what sort of interventions are they using? And so there's 30 plus years of studies in this field looking at this problem, because they recognize it is a problem. And so I'm at a workshop where the dean of one of these College of Medicines is presenting this data. And she shows basically something very similar to one of the graphs I use. And that's you start off with near equal amounts of women and men at a training level. So for my field, it's PhD. And then when you move on to the postdoc level, you have drop off from both genders, but you have a larger drop off from women. More are not making it to the next step. And then when you go to tenure, it decreases even more. And then when you finally get to like a leadership position, the sort of people that we trust to actually act on these sorts of things, it gets even lower. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking about, the impact this has on the community for retention and, attracting minorities to the field. And I'm like, I know this story. Like just my heart sank all the way to the floor. And she called it a leaky pipeline, and it just resonated with me. It's like, what we're doing is we're not taking the talent that we have and moving it through all of the steps of the path to reach this leadership. And once you don't have that in leadership, it's a self-fulfilling cycle. And so I was like, okay, what does the SCA representation look like? And so I started with a lot of conversations, to figure out what people wanted to look at. And basically just trying to figure out what could be done from a data standpoint to start by identifying the problem.
All right. Well, that's definitely a good approach to, here's a problem. Oh my gosh, I recognize this because my hobby. So how did you collect and analyze the data that ended up being used for this paper?
Yeah. So the first thing I did, as I mentioned, was have a lot of conversations to figure out what the questions actually were. So in research, you can basically pull any data what you want, but you have to have your question in mind so that you're looking at the data the right way. You're not making assumptions, you're getting the right data, you're doing the right analysis. And the biggest questions that seemed to come up over and over again was, is there a problem? I don't know why we had to prove this, but we had to prove there is actually a problem that is in particular manifest at the higher levels of leadership. And the other question was is it drop off? Are we losing through retention issues, or are we just making it harder for women to reach those positions? Because you're going to have different interventions that you need for those two different options. And so that's what led me to look at two different analyses. So to basically figure out what the problem looked like, I started by pulling order of precedence data. So basically using the database, which had names, it had the date of the award, and you could pull lists of everybody who's received this award. And for this pass, we looked at everybody who'd received an award, and I had somebody on the team who was from that area who could go through and identify this person had this gender identity at the time of the award. And so we could basically score, okay, this is how they identified, and sort the gender representation that way. We didn't attempt to restrict it based on time. It was just pulling all comers, but it was limited by how the order of precedence was set up, and it was limited by people I knew who could actually go through and help me clean the data. And then, oh yes, the other thing is the awards had to be Rapier specific. So I wasn't interested in an armature level general award. I wanted to know about an armature level Rapier award. So certain kingdoms that were not able to be included on all things, but that was the general idea. And then the second analysis I did was to look at couples. So where there was a male and female who were cohabitating, were partners, between the period of time where they both received their AOA, and in this case it was general, I didn't distinguish, and when they received their white scarf. And so this was just basically pulling the dates for those two events and then doing a pairwise comparison. So the assumption here was that they had access to the same training environment, financial resources, child rearing requirements, just basically everything about these two people should be the same, except one's the female partner and one's the male partner. Oh, and they travel together. So yeah, that was the idea. And then basically doing a t-test to compare between those two groups.
Yeah, I believe that's table 2. The last table in the paper is the ratio of female to male time advancement. Is that the couple one?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so it was from AOA to their top award?
No, it was to the grant level awards. So the ogre, the white scarf, whatever the kingdom level equivalent was.
Okay. Yeah, we're So for Atenveldt, you have, for one female, you have 0.41 to male, or how does this chart work? I'm not really understanding it. So we're looking at 1.41 for Atenveldt, female to male time. How does that translate to me?
Basically, what that means is the woman is taking 40% longer than her male partner to get to the same point.
Wow.
It's taking almost half again as long. And when you look at all of the kingdoms together, it's 33% longer. So we're making it at least a third harder for women to reach that point.
Yeah. On Stiora is 3.05. That's your biggest number there. What would that translate to?
3 times as long to advance.
Right. So it takes a guy 3 years and it takes a woman 9. Is that what that means?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
So actually, let me do a quick screen share of the data as a whole. So basically, you can see there's the pink box. That's the spread of the amount of time it took women to advance. There's women taking over 250 months. So that's 10 plus years, 20 plus years. And then, the median is this black line here. And so on average, it's taking women, I think it was 68 months. So that's 5 years. And then, men, again, they live in the same household. They're taking 50 some odd months. So a little over 4 years.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. All right. So when I look at this, I know this is a question I had for later, but I figure it's probably best now. You only represent 7 kingdoms in the paper. You have Atenveldt, Outlands, Anstiora, Caid, North Shield, Trimaris, and Antir.
Mm-hmm.
When was the date of this research that you did? I'm sure if I scrolled back up, I'd see the date, but and why was it only those 7 kingdoms?
Yeah, so like I said, I needed somebody who was a volunteer from that kingdom who knew enough about the community to identify gender. And for the household information, I had to know about partnerships. That requires a bit more detailed information about individuals and their relationships. So it was just based on the volunteers I could recruit at the time. And it was done shortly after Illidor was like, hey, and I'm like, hey, give me that data. I want to include it. So
Give me the data.
Give me the data. June 2020, something like that. And I think I did the poll and the preliminary write-up March to May of 2020, maybe starting in January.
And what were your overall conclusions about this data?
I'm going to do another screen share.
Yay.
Yay.
Charts and graphs.
Yeah. So this is looking at the female representation at the AOA level, the grant level, and the Masters of Defense level.
It's a lot of blue.
It's a lot of blue. Yeah, it is. It really is. And we were not able to figure out what the baseline participation looks like, or the, what's the percentage like when they first pick up a sword. But most of the ways we were able to kind of guess at it, it was around 40 to 50%. So let's say that, the first time picking up the sword, it's half and half men and women. Getting to this stage, you're losing about half of them. Getting to this stage, you're losing another half. Getting to this stage, you're losing another half. So that's more than just it takes longer, although it definitely takes longer. You're also just straight up having a retention problem. So the combination of the two lets me know that it's both. It's retention and it's advancement, so mentorship.
And why would you come to the conclusion that it's both? I'm interested in the overall explanation.
Because a 33% increase in time doesn't explain how you lose half the people. And so I've banged my head, tried to figure out how to mathematically model it. And I'm like, nope, that's not what I'm doing. So it's just it's both. Also, if you ever talk to women or you like look at these OPs, you're like, oh, she doesn't come out anymore. She doesn't come out anymore. She doesn't come out anymore. So it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. It takes somebody actually listening to these stories and with an open mind and going, looks like something's wrong.
Indeed, looks like something's wrong. All right. Thank you, Perrin. I'm gonna move over to Sancha now. You made a really good report on fighter practice in Atenveldt, which I also posted the link to a PDF in the event. So for anyone who didn't check that out before, go to the event, check out that PDF. So we provided that link. Why did you conduct this survey on fighter practice needs and satisfaction?
So I had my own personal experience of not being really happy with how the fighter practice in my local group was being run with what we were doing. And I kind of figured that I wasn't the only person, but in order to have a conversation with the community, and especially with the leadership of the community, I needed to have data. I needed it to be more than just my story or other people's anecdotes. It needed to be something concrete. So I figured we can do a survey, we can see what people's feelings are about fighter practice, how they are felt welcomed in the community, what kind of training they're getting, are they feeling welcome, that sort of thing, to have something concrete to then begin the discussion.
Okay, so you started actually a slightly deeper dive as to see, how and why fighter practice may or may not be working for
Right.
People and various genders or various groups.
Yes, we specifically wanted to ask questions and be able to sort the data with who those people were. Were they less experienced people, more experienced people? Were they coming from small baronies and shires? Were they coming from the larger groups? What gender did they identify with? What was their sexual orientation? What was their ethnicity? Did they consider themselves to be a minority? And did that impact their levels of satisfaction or dissatisfaction?
Okay. How did you actually go about the task of collecting this much data, and who responded? I mean, what level of response rate did you get back on this survey?
So the way we worked the survey, we used Google Forms to come up with the actual survey itself, and then we distributed it on lots of different Facebook groups within the kingdom. And we try to get as many people as possible to take the survey and provide us the information. We wanted to keep the data relatively safe in terms of being able to maintain people's privacy. So we didn't ask people to give us their names because we didn't want that information to get out by accident, especially when you're talking about really small groups where maybe there only are 3 or 5 fighters. It could be very easy to identify who's the one who doesn't like what's going on. So we wanted to be able to protect people that way. We came up with the survey, we asked a lot of different questions, and we formatted it in a way that people could provide lots of different answers to a single question. So if we asked, I like my fighter practice because, we would give them 10 different answers to explain what it is about their fighter practice that they're happy with. And then conversely, we'd also ask, if you're not happy with your fighter practice, please tell us why, and give them another 10 different answers to again be able to get to more specifically why they weren't happy. Was it because they didn't feel safe? Was it because they didn't feel accepted? Or were they just not getting the training they wanted, or whatever the reason? So we gave them lots of different options. Plus, excuse me, we also gave them a fill in the blank, just in case we didn't cover the issue that was causing a problem for them. In terms of who responded back, we got 143 responses, which was actually not bad for 2 months of having the survey open, and for it only being available through Facebook groups.
Right.
We tried to ask people to spread it around, but essentially that was the base that we were able to use, in part because we were in the middle of the pandemic and there wasn't a way to go to practices in person and kind of drum up the support for it. We did get a good spread in terms of levels of experience, in terms of rank, in terms of where groups were, which groups were responding. So we actually did a double check comparing the respondents and then the number of authorized fighters in each group. And while not exact, they were pretty close in terms of the percentages. So it's reasonably accurate. Large groups had lots more respondents, small groups had smaller number of respondents. And it was a mix of armored and rapier fighters. We didn't distinguish in terms of only having one group respond.
Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned keeping names out of it and keeping privacy, important.
Right.
And I had to go through all of my stupid HR trainings for my job this week, and one of them was, about keeping data and collecting data, and how never collect any more data than you will need, because you will have data that may be potentially a problem with someone's privacy.
Right, and part of the trick we did with Google Forms is there's an option you can allow people to log in order to take the survey, which allows only one survey per person. But we decided that we were willing to take the risk that there weren't going to be a lot of people taking the survey multiple times to throw the data off.
Now I find this fascinating. You did all practices like rattan and rapier. Did you also include like archery or things like that, or just stick?
We just kept with stick, in part because, well, the part of the problem was, one, for the most part in our kingdom, the fighter practices for archery are completely separate, different location, different time, different day than for rapier and armored. And also, I don't have any experience with that community. And I didn't want to make presumptions about a group that I didn't know anything about. I just didn't feel comfortable starting a conversation when I didn't have any information to work with. So I limited it to the group that I had reasonable comfort with in terms of understanding the group and what might be issues that we need to talk about.
Now in Atenveldt, is it common that you have rapier and rattan at the same time? I know most places do have rapier and rattan at the same practice, but
yes, most of the time the barony or the shire will have a single fighter practice for each week, and everybody that whether you're rapier or armored or even C&T, that's the fighter practice you go to.
Fantastic. So what did you find with this survey that you did of fighter practice, and how people feel safe or well trained?
So there were a couple things that came out of the data. What we found is the people that were most likely to say that they were dissatisfied, unhappy with how things were being run in fighter practice were people who said that they weren't getting the training that they wanted. Whether it was a case of like in the small group where there's only 3 fighters, so there's only so many people, only so many people who can teach, or you're dealing with people who are saying that there's lots of people there, but nobody will train me. Nobody trains me the way that I feel comfortable being trained. So that was a strong trend that we found in the data. We also found a strong trend between people who were dissatisfied with their level of training, dissatisfied with fighter practice, and those who were thinking of quitting. And if you consider the fact that we're mining data from people who are still attending and we're not getting the people who have quit, the ones who are saying that they're considering are quitting is pretty significant, because pretty soon they're going to be gone and out of the picture and not being able to be seen.
Yeah. Did you have a breakdown for gender on that, or any other minority, or?
So one of the questions that we asked was, do you feel like you have a chance at becoming a peer in your fighting style? And do you think it's even possible? And the strongest trends that we found were, for people who said that they did not think that they had a chance of becoming a peer, were, I'm not getting the training I needed, I have an injury, or I consider myself a minority, whether it's for race, gender, or sexual identity. Those were the three big ones right there.
And those were reasons people gave as to why they thought they would not be able to make it to a peerage.
No, that
Okay.
was correlated.
Okay, correlated. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Is there anything else about the fight survey that you'd like to discuss?
So two things, actually. One is small groups, so groups that tend to have less than 15 fighters showing up or registered as authorized fighters in their group tend to have a very hard time being seen, getting access to training. And a lot of them don't feel like, again, they don't feel like they actually have an opportunity to become a peer. They may still fight, but they don't think that there's a chance that they'll ever become a peer simply because they can't ever be seen. The other thing that we found really interesting, we did, because we had the data, we looked at everybody that responded who was a peer and everybody who responded who was not a peer. And then we looked at how they responded to whether or not they considered themselves a minority for one of the issues. And the percentages were pretty striking that the higher up you go in the peerage, the less likely you are to consider yourself a minority for any one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's some pretty telling data there. Even
It
though it's
is.
just for one kingdom, I suspect if we repeated that situation across other kingdoms, which I'll probably get to later in this discussion, we get some similar results along the way. But before we get into the general discussion, Donia Marie, I wanted to come over to you real quick also and have you, you're doing such great work with the Valkyrie company and giving women and gender minorities a good place to be and to be supported. Tell us about some of your efforts to address gender gaps and gaps in general in training, mentorship, and especially for women and gender minorities.
Sure. So to start with, I really, I didn't think it was gender at first. I thought there was something wrong with me. I couldn't get past this plateau that had lasted maybe 10 years, and my teachers would give me wonderful advice, and I just couldn't manage to incorporate it. And so it was actually that article on box wrestle fence, which later became incorporated into the book Fear is the Mind Killer, that opened my eyes to there's nothing wrong with me. I learn in a different way. And the way that I learn is similar to a lot of other women's ways of learning. And suddenly it all made sense to me. The people I had admired who dropped out of the SCA right before achieving greatness that I never saw again. The fact that I can go to a fighter practice and 50% of the people there sparring are women, but in our circle, only 1 out of 8 are women. And suddenly that all started to click in my head, and I was like, when I'm a Donia, I'm going to require all of my cadets to gather twice a year for a boot camp, and we're going to study fighting, and we're going to get strong. And why do I have to wait until I'm a Donia? I could do that now. So I did. As a cadet, I had a boot camp, and the first one, there were just like a baker's dozen. I picked people that I thought would be sympathetic to the plight, other women and gender minority people who I also noted were struggling. And so I approached them individually. We had this boot camp and we lifted weights, we did yoga, we talked about injury recovery, we talked about nutrition, we talked about all of those things that an athlete knows, but a brand new fighter coming from a desk job may not understand. So we worked on improving ourselves, and then it grew, and word of mouth, and we began to spread, and we got bigger, and we had more boot camps. And we now have like, I think 160 something members on the Facebook page. And really what we're trying to do is create a supportive environment, create a think tank, come up with solutions to problems, improve ourselves, and make up some of those gaps between, me starting as a person on the street to an athletic competitor, and then hope that, we, at least from the grassroots, can make ourselves visible.
Absolutely. We had some questions in the chat about the book. So since the chat won't be saved with the YouTube machine, I will tell you the title is Fear is the Mind Killer, and it is by Kaja Sadowski. I probably just butchered her name, but it is a well-recommended book, and something that a lot of people have recommended. I just bought it recently and intend to read it myself. So.
It's really good.
So I have a weird note here that I'm really not sure how to transfer into a question. So bear with me. I have fighter practice survey 2 times indicated cooperative environment equals success compared to competitive. Do you know what I'm talking about if I say those words?
Yeah, basically, and this goes into Sanchez survey, but it had originally one of the things that was in that article on Box Russell offense that became Kaja Sadowski's book talked about the difference between a competitive environment and a cooperative environment. And so in a competitive fighter practice, we show up, we put on our gear, we pick a person, we spar to 10 passes, we shake hands, and we leave. And that is it. And maybe you keep score and maybe you don't, but that's kind of it. At a cooperative practice, you get together with a person, you say, hey, I really want to work on my foot shots. Would you like to work on your counter to the foot shot? And we'll just spar. And after 1 or 2 passes, we'll stop and we'll talk about what's working and what's not working. And then we'll start again and we'll do 2 more passes. And then we'll talk about what's working and what's not working. And we're both going to help each other to get better. So it's not a miniature tournament. I'm not trying to win fighter practice. I'm trying to teach myself and teach the people around me and be taught by them in a collaborative way. We are all here in the pool together. There is no big fish. We're just trying to, be better fighters. And when I pointed that out and talked about it at our boot camps, and we talked about it on the Valkyrie page, that became one of the questions that Sancha included in her survey is, do you prefer a cooperative environment or do you prefer a competitive environment? And it's totally valid. You can enjoy competition and you can be good at competition and prefer a cooperative environment. You don't have to train competitively to be a competitor, but there are different learning modes. And it's one of the things that I have always quoted is when you only teach people in the way that was successful for you, then only the people who are just like you can succeed. And so if we don't provide multiple learning environments, then the only people that we are teaching to succeed are the people who are exactly like us. And you can look at the first 2 or 3 white scarves in your kingdom to see what exactly like us looks like in your area.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Especially, I do remind people there is no winning practice. Like practice is where you work on things. And if I want to gear up for QRC, I'll tell people, hey, I want you to give me your QRC passes. Like I want that. But that shouldn't, to me, be everyday practice. And
Sure.
that's how I feel like we end up with people going, I hit you in the head. Stop letting me hit you in the head. I hit you in the head.
Yeah.
That sort of like really bad training or loop where people aren't actually learning anything or teaching anything. You just have some people who want to win practice and then they're making everyone else their punching bag, and it's not cool.
And it wasn't until maybe just the past couple of years doing all this research with everybody else that it occurred to me that you can have practice and not spar at all and still be training valuable skills, which is really great to have that understanding before we were all in quarantine, because then I knew I could still practice in quarantine. I don't have to have another person to hit. There are other skills I can practice. I can still practice my rapier related techniques without actually having a sparring environment.
We've had some questions in the comments about your Valkyrie boot camp and more information about it. Can you talk to us more about Valkyrie boot camp?
So Valkyrie Boot Camp was originally why Valkyrie Company started, and now they've kind of both grown. We have not had a boot camp since quarantine began, But the general concept is that if you're a member of Valkyrie Company, which is any interested fighter who is basically gender minority, transitioning, non-binary, and of course women, you join Valkyrie Company on the Facebook page. If you search Facebook for Valkyrie Company and you see a sword with big purple wings, that's us. So yeah, and then we have these boot camps. So what we have tried to do right now, they are all located in Onsteora because I encourage people to create their own boot camps, and maybe I'll even fly out and visit you. Invite me, please. I need to get out of this house someday. But right now, yeah, we try to have them twice a year. We try to pick a weekend that, at least for our kingdom, doesn't have anything conflicting. So not against a major Rapier tournament. We try to have them maybe opposite something like a red tape event. We'll find either a venue, or sometimes we just parked in the backyard. One of our members has an aunt with a farm and a giant bunkhouse that she can sleep 20 people at. So we fill that house with people, and starting on Saturday morning, sometimes starting Friday morning and running for a 3-day weekend, but we try to get in as much Academy of the Rapier and Academy of Fighting as we can. So we have tracks with classes and topics, but it's all around filling that gap between hobbyist and athlete and finding ways to address those imbalances.
So what would a typical boot camp look like? Would you have instructors? Would you have practice time? Would you have a balance of both?
Yeah.
How does that work?
So the way it would work is we would have instructors. I typically ask for volunteers, and I ask for topics people are interested in, and I try to organize it ahead of time, very much like you would for a collegium or an academy. Who's available to teach? What do they want to teach? What do people want to learn? And can I track down someone who's willing to teach that? And then we try to organize that into a flow. So we get up, so first everyone shows up on Friday night and we all get tanked. Then on Saturday morning, we will have a sit-down class where we might talk about structuring practice, and then we'll have some sort of activity like this is how to deadlift. And then we have another sit-down class, and then we have lunch, and we just kind of go back and forth. There's sparring time in the afternoon, and we stay up very late and have bonding, and we play games. We play some cooperative games that help us to get into that mindset of how to have a fun, challenging environment without actually competing, but still winning in the end. Just silly things involving like balloons or dances or whatever. And then we just do it all again, Sunday until it's time to leave. We did have one in the summer a couple years ago where we actually started Friday. And so we were running from noon on Friday. We were having classes until about 2 o'clock on Sunday. And classes usually began early, and then we usually wrapped up sometime around 7. And frequently we're eating our food standing up while we continue to talk about class topics.
That's great. All right. So I'm going to bring this back around to the original topic, the Leaky Pipeline paper, and as well as the practice survey. And also, organizing and building these really great big events that are helpful to women and gender minorities. Let's talk about this as a group of this panel. What should people do with this information that you ladies have gathered and have spread around the known world? Who wants to start?
I have go Illidor.
Illidor, raise your hand. I'm a kindergarten teacher at heart. I will pick the person who raises their hand first.
We have detected that this is a problem. So the first thing that we really need to have happen is people need to accept that this is a real problem. We have actual data. Like first of all, we've had women's stories. We've had minority stories for a long time saying that this is a problem, but people have been saying, well, that's just you, or just one problem, or it's not me, it's not us. Now we have actual data. And by the way, the data was bad when I read it, but when you were explaining it, Perrin, in detail, I just like the feeling I had was just, it was so bad. It was so awful. The data is so telling and so awful. We need actually people to recognize, hey, this is a problem. And step two for that is that every single person listening to this in some fashion, every single person in the SCA, every single person in Rapier, every single person in Heavy needs to realize this is their problem as well. Most importantly, and the thing that I want to kind of like reiterate is just like, if we fix this problem, it is a literal win-win situation. And by that, I don't mean Illidor wins twice. No, I mean everyone wins.
I mean, Illidor does win twice sometimes.
It is true. I do in fact win twice. It is my nature. But like, no, this is a real win-win situation, because it means more people to fight, more people are in fencing, more people are in Heavy, more people to stab. I want more people to stab. I want COVID to be gone so I can stab more people, but I really want more people to stab. And the quickest way to fix this problem is to stop up the leaky pipeline, and more people will stay, and we will have more fencing and more heavy fighting going on.
I will bounce into that, even though I'm moderator, and throw my 2 cents in, because I can't help myself. I feel like the win-win there is not just more people, but having representation matters. Having people that look like you, and in the case of Illidor and I standing next to each other, it's like a little 5-foot person and a giant Amazonian goddess. But having more people that just look like you, more people who are minorities in positions where you can say, hey, if they made it, I can too. And that's what I want for all of my friends who are struggling with this and who are minorities, because that representation matters. Marie, what do we do with this information?
Well, I wanted to first tag on that you're talking about, representation and having more people who look like you. And this is one of the ways we can solve that retention problem. We talked for a couple of years before COVID about the SCA is an old aging community, and we're not bringing in a lot of new people, and how do we compete with free online games? And one of the ways is, don't let people just drift off into the sunset because they've been fighting for 20 years with no recognition. Either recognize them or give them skills so they can be recognized. And like, again, I have seen so many friends that I admired, that I looked up to, that were role models for me, who left the SCA and quit fighting. And they were mostly women, and they left because of the frustration of not being able to achieve their goals, whether that goal was recognition or just accomplishment. What can we do? One of the things I want to say is, the one way to solve the problem, we've all heard, the first step is admitting you have a problem. Open your eyes and see the people around you. I mentioned something on my general Facebook page about the lack of women in leadership in Rapier, and a comment that I got from a person in the community was, well, there just aren't that many women fighting at all. And I was like, dude, I was at the tournament you were at last weekend. We were there. I asked the list mistress, 43% of the entrants were female. Where were you? And what were you looking at that you didn't see women on the field? If you think this problem is because the community doesn't have enough warm bodies, you need to open your eyes, and you need to acknowledge that there are women around you. And that's the first step. And then from there, always ask yourself, am I being, if you're teaching, have a woman demonstrate with you. If you're talking to the class and you notice there aren't women sitting in your class, ask yourself why, and then maybe go drag them in from the hall, whatever. But it's just about making sure you kind of have to use some affirmative action. You kind of have to actually really try to solve the problem, boots on the ground, and not just talk about it.
I agree, and I want to piggyback on something you said there, where you said, you know, if a woman's been around 20 years and she's not getting recognition, you know, maybe she needs more skills, maybe she needs something. And there's a lot of people, especially on a certain gender minority group, who are like, you know, hey, maybe it shouldn't all be about awards. You shouldn't be chasing awards. But people want to know that what they're doing matters, first off. They want to know what they're doing matters. And if what they're doing doesn't matter as much as a man, like, that does not make me feel good. And the second thing is that, just having the award, having that status also does mean that you are paid attention to more, for good or for bad. But if I, for instance, went to go teach a class, they'd say, oh, Maester Brigid's teaching this class, versus, like, you know, Lady Jane teaching this class. They probably aren't going to go to Lady Jane's class, and that makes me sad. And so, you know, the awards do matter in more than just, I have a cool title to enter a tournament with. Yeah. It means that we have a voice, not just representation, but we have a loud voice that we can use. And it's important, like, awards matter because of that aspect.
Yes. Part of my path was realizing that I didn't have to have rank to be influential, but dang, I can be so much more influential once I have the rank.
Absolutely. I'm gonna move on to Donia Perrin on this one. You've been hopping up and down, but I really want to know, what should people do with this information? You're our information person.
Yeah. So a couple of key things that other people have covered for sure, but other things, look at your local area. So not just like, what does your representation look like, but where your gaps might be different from other areas. Or like, hey, maybe there's an area nearby you that's doing really well. Pick their brain, but try to look carefully and critically at what's going on in your local area, and use that to identify, you know, places where you can intervene, things that you can potentially do some good with. The other thing you should do with this is start having conversations to educate, and don't just drop that on me, because I've been having these conversations. Like, we need to reach new people. And also, like, I need somebody else to take on this torch so I can get back to my training. You know, like, I've got other things I want to be doing, rather than trying to explain to people that there's a problem when there's clearly a problem. So amplify these voices with your own. And on that note, like, what should you be doing? Recruiting allies, you know, talking to people, saying like, hey, you know, is this something that I can get your support on? And, you know, tell them what that support needs to look like. Don't be shy, you know, be like, and if somebody is approaching you about being an ally, you know, critically examine some things that you might need to improve upon. Being an ally means growing as a person. And, you know, that's not something I'm burdening other people with. Like, it's something that I'm trying to do for myself as well. So, you know, basically agree to be an ally, and then figure out how that looks like. And I'm going to link a blog because I have a lot to say on that topic. And yeah, so basically, once you know what your area looks like, once you have people who are allies, once you have these conversations going on, you can kind of brainstorm and, you know, create initiatives for short or long-term goals. Normal people, like these different awards, like the Barons and Baronesses, what is everybody going to do? Have everybody have their own little piece of the bigger picture. And then finally, monitor your progress. So basically, come back at this in the next 5 years, and, you know, hopefully we can kind of see some progress and have some good news. So think of this like getting your biometrics at the beginning of a physical fitness training program. Maybe you're not so happy with what this looks like, but that should be turned into energy for improving the problem. So put that energy to work.
That's good. Tell me about this blog, because the chat's not going to accompany the YouTube. So you can briefly give us the title or something to search, or will you just put it in the group afterwards?
I can put it in the group afterwards, but it's Valkyrie Bootcamp at .blogspot.com. I keep dropping things in there about like how do teachers improve, about these different data collection efforts, and the most recent one I wrote was about what allies can be doing to help. So,
and that's all one word, Valkyrie Bootcamp.
Awesome, thank you. I think you hit a really important point there, that we are often asked, well, what can we do? And I'm like, we've been making videos this whole pandemic, guys. We've been making a wide variety of videos with women's voices, lifting them up and saying, here's problems. And even before pandemic, we'd have roundtables at Penzic. I think, you know, there were a couple of them actually. And, you know, we need people to stop asking us if it's just about crying. And we actually just need agitators for change and people who are going to make the community a healthier community that's more inclusive. And inclusivity isn't a bad word. We really need to focus on that as a society. Sancha, I have not forgotten about you, I promise. Your time is up. What should people do with this information?
Well, for people outside of Atenveldt, I would say do the survey for yourself in your own group. Get the hard data so that you can have the conversations with the leadership in your area. And we've started having the conversations in Atenveldt. They've been interesting. Some groups have been very receptive to the idea of, oh yes, we want to try to help the different groups. We want to make these changes. And other groups, typically Knights, not all of them, tend to get into the, well, no, but we're fine. We're not bigots. We're not, you know, misogynist. No. There's a female knight right there. So with those people, I tend to try to take the tack of, well, but what about training? What about different methods of training? Let's ignore the whole gender issue. Let's just talk about different methods of training. How can we become better teachers? And sometimes that kind of gets past their self-defense mechanism. But basically it's just, you got to have lots and lots and lots of conversations with people. And sometimes it's in different ways, but you just got to keep talking until they just can't stand listening to you anymore and will do something about it just to shut you up.
That's an important thing, but you know, as we've said in other videos as well, asking the minority to do all the heavy lifting. And it's
too hard. It's too heavy.
Hard. And it's very heavy. It's super hard. So you tied into my next question very well. This is a question open to everyone, and I'm going to kind of combine my next two questions into one to make it a little bit easier on our time, because we are getting a little late, and I'd like to do a little Q&A. What other studies are needed, and can people conduct their own research, and what does that look like? Obviously, there are concerns about people gathering data on their own, and maybe gathering data that would be not helpful or secure. And so data security with these polls is very important. So who wants to take this question first? Perrin. Okay, Sancha.
No, Perrin, you go ahead.
No, actually, you go ahead.
Okay, what I'm going to say first is find somebody who knows how to do statistical analysis. I didn't, and I would have just ended up with a pile of data that was numbers and wouldn't have meant anything to me. I kind of went in a bit naive, so definitely find somebody to help you with statistical analysis to understand how to parse the data out, how to sift through it to actually find the trends. The second thing.
And what are you looking for when you're looking for someone like that? Are you looking for like a data scientist? Are you looking for like I mean, we are a hodgepodge of people with random jobs in the SCA, and often we call on each other to ask for help. So, you know, we do have lots of scientists, lots of accountants, but like, what would you look for something like that?
I'm actually going to hand this over to Perrin because she's a lot more knowledgeable on this field than I am.
Okay. You were going to say something else before I asked you that question, so we'll table that for a moment, unless I derailed you.
No, well, I guess the second part was when you start formulating your questions, be thoughtful about how you phrase your questions. Try to find different ways of phrasing the same question in different ways, so that you can basically double check yourself with the data. Was it just because everything was phrased negatively, people responded poorly to it? Try to find, ways of phrasing things in positive ways and in negative ways, giving lots of people lots of options, but also making sure that every option you have has its counterpart, to be able to double check your data. If you have a lot of people saying, I don't like this, do you have as many people saying that they do like it, or did you not ask the question? If you didn't ask the question, you didn't give people an opportunity to say, yes, I do like this thing. So find ways of balancing your questions. Talk to lots of, test out your questions with people to get feedback on how they're reacting to the questions, to make sure that you're putting the survey together in an effective manner.
Two follow-up questions, or one's kind of a comment, one's a question. I feel like I've taken too many surveys in the SCA that are filled with loaded and biased questions that I just cringe
Yes.
while I'm reading the survey. And so I feel like it's really important, if you're gonna do a survey, like you said, to make sure every question is balanced, or has a wide range, and is as neutral sounding as possible. Also, this survey that was made for Atenveldt fighter practices, is that something that could be made available so that other kingdoms could use the same form, perhaps?
Yes, I don't know about what you think, Perrin, but I think we could at least provide the questions and the format. It was basically just done as a Word document that we then imported into Google Forms. So that would at least be a start, in terms of the types of things that we were asking.
Yeah.
There were some questions we would have changed, I think, afterwards.
All right, well, tagging in Perrin.
So the first thing I will say is I went overboard on the science, and unapologetically, because it's how I dig into a problem and really understand it for myself as I tease it apart. And that informs how I'm able to talk about it, and sort of like the other spin-off things that I need to ask. It raises new questions that I need to look at it in new ways. But the fundamentals of, percentages is really accessible to anybody. And I've actually started seeing this popping up all over the place, and that's really inspiring. So, the rate of admission of female mods over time, that's informative, and anybody can collect that data. Creating a survey to ask questions of like, well, what do people like? And then you can see the counts. It's like, wow, a lot of people are like saying my training needs aren't being met. If you want to start doing like correlation analyses or trying to figure out how meaningful that is statistically, yes, you might need something a little bit more sophisticated, but you don't need to go overboard. You can just ask. But if we look at the award breakdown, what does that look like now? Okay, well, what does that look like over, the last 5 years versus the 25 years leading up to it? What does the participation look like at this event, at this big tournament, in our authorizations? Percentages can really help gauge what it is that you're looking at. So don't feel like you have to do what I did. Just start asking these questions, crunching the numbers, and using that as the basis for discussions. Because the data doesn't solve the problems. The data just directs our attention so that we can potentially work from there and do something meaningful with that.
Okay, thank you. Illidor or Marie, would either of you like a crack at, are other studies needed now in the future, or can people conduct their own studies, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see studies that I would like to see numbers on tournament participation. And so maybe self-reported, or maybe list mistresses could just do some tick counting heads on a piece of paper. and then let us know afterwards, like there were 80 participants in this tournament and 47 of them were male or something like that. You know, just some of these little head county things, because I think that's something that a lot of us told ourselves for a very long time, that the lack of women in leadership was reflective of the lack of women in general in the community. And so if you really start going in and counting how many participants you have at several tournaments over a period of years, that's going to tell you a lot of data. You know, same thing, count how many people are formal students and how many people are new and how many people have awards already, and just all the data. It's all helpful, I think. And yeah, you can collect way too much of it. And the SCA doesn't give people exit surveys when they stop renewing their membership, but that would be a great study as well.
That's a super dire thing to think about, actually. Like, here's your exit survey. Oh God. Now I'm getting flashbacks to being laid off. Illidor.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact. So I'm convinced, right? Like none of the data that has been presented actually shows me it is worse than I thought it was. And I thought it was terrible and terrifying. It's now like, it's so bad that I don't need to be convinced that this is a problem anymore. The data that I would like to collect and see is what works, what can we do to affect change? What can people do to affect change starting now? I read the Harvard Business Review, which is one of my favorite magazines, came out with how to fight racism at work. And there are a lot of details in there of very basic things people can do at work. And I would say at a hobby is similar. We do work for our hobby. That there's a lot of things in that, as well as in other really good books of things we can do to help with retention, help with diversity, help with equity and inclusion, and help make our society better. And I would like to figure out what those sorts of studies would be. I don't have the answers for that. I have lists of things, as people have been asking me for a very long time, what can they do? So we now have lists of that. I would like to see people starting to take ownership and start looking at their own data. That would be what I would really want. I want people to start collecting their own data and reporting on it. Like, I would like the mods to start talking about, these are the numbers of women I recruited. These are the numbers of minorities that I personally recruited. These are the numbers that we have this quarter. This is the numbers that we have this year, and looking at like that over time. I am convinced that our numbers are terrible when it comes to retention of women and other minorities in the SCA. So I'm convinced of that. I don't feel like we need to collect any more data on this other than to say, hey, it's still happening. We haven't done enough about this problem. I would much prefer to see what can we do about it, what are we doing about it on a monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis.
That's a really good action plan, and if we can get them to do it, that would be amazing.
I honestly think that every single kingdom should have a mod committee that discusses how to improve their retention rates, and they should meet about this every single quarter. I really do. I think this should be an ongoing activity and yeah, guess what? It's going to be work, but I feel like it is absolutely necessary at this time.
Okay, I have at least 2 more questions, and then if Illidor, if you could go through the chat and see if there's anything we really need to touch on, because we're starting to get really long on time, and I don't want to make the video too long or people won't watch it. Donia Perrin, I wanted to loop back around with you on the data question. So there is an epidemiologist who is really determined to criticize your data collection and the data, and you know, we don't have enough information on size or weight or age or injury or childbirth or whatever, and maybe we didn't dive too deep to really understand this, and maybe awards aren't the way to look at this, but anyway we've looked at this, it's terrible. Like, our numbers are terrible no matter what we do about it. But there's been some discussion about the nature of the data collection used for the paper you wrote, and people from different data-driven careers have been critical of that data. Would you like to address this critique, and what can we and can't we conclude using the data, and what are the limitations of the data that you used?
Yeah. So as a scientist, if people look at it and they go, oh my gosh, you forgot this, that's good. Like, that warms my heart, because it means that they're looking at this with the same degree of a critical eye that I am. And they want to know more about, did you look at this? Did you consider this? And basically, I encourage you to do so. Like, please, by all means, take the data and go with it. But I want to point out that, you know, this was the first effort that I am aware of looking at this sort of data and trying to figure out what it looked like and how to even look at it. So you all have to start somewhere, and feed me the criticisms. Like, I will incorporate it into a version 2. But I want to address a couple of the criticisms in particular. Yes, there's going to be differences between active participation numbers and awards. Like, those are different factors that drive those two things. Those should absolutely be considered in parallel. Data needs to be collected on both, and you can basically make conclusions about different things. If you have great participation data and poor award data, maybe you should look very hard at how these awards are being recommended, how people are being discussed when they are brought up for these awards, and what information is being looped back to those people to help them reach the level that they need to, versus, are they showing up? Like, if they're not showing up, but they're getting awarded, you know, that lets you know that you need to take a different tack on how you're training. Are they safe? Are they getting, you know, teaching that they need? So different possibilities there. Also, I looked at gender. Gender is possibly the messiest variable I can possibly think of. It means something different to literally everybody. And it's a combination of your upbringing, your biology, the attitudes of people towards you, your personality, expectations of your time. So by looking at gender, we're looking at all of those things together. But you know what? People are experiencing all of those things together. And just because it doesn't look all the same, or we can't say exactly what the magic bullet is, doesn't mean that there isn't something profoundly wrong going on. And I think that gets lost in some of these criticisms sometimes. So yeah, I was only able to look at kingdoms where I could get good data. So one of the good things to come out of this is I went to the order of precedence and I said, why don't we have pronouns on the order of precedence? And Atenveldt made that change. And I had actually at least one transgender person come to me and say, thank you. That was so personally affirming. And a bunch of scribes who were like, oh, fantastic. So it's not just about—
As a scribe, I can confirm that would be amazing to have.
Yeah. So, you know, it's useful in a lot of ways. So thinking about how the order of precedence could be used to generate data, and the better the quality of the data, the better of the quality of the studies that can come from it, is something that should be getting looped back into our kingdoms for planning going forward. So yeah. Another criticism has been well, are you looking at historical data or are you looking at current data? So you have to start somewhere. I looked at everywhere, but you know, we also included an analysis of over time. And I got to tell you, like, I did the linear regression and these lines fit exactly. Like, the slope of women being elevated was 1/5 of this one, and it just dead over time. Like, there was no fluctuations when you actually like graphed it. So, you know, I guess what I would want to say is, if you see this data and your natural instinct is to make excuses, oh, well, the women in my area have these problems, or if you just want to sit there and nitpick the data and not look at the big picture of what it's saying, you need to take a real strong look at yourself, because this is not okay.
I would agree that the data indicates, no matter how we do it, that we have things that we can do better. And we're at a historic restart where we could do things better. Illidor?
I want to just foot stomp that last thing that Perrin said, right? Like there have been individual women who have been talking about this for years. And now we actually have data. And if your first thought is like, well, no, this is wrong. Take a hard look at yourself and take a hard look at the people you're hanging out with and question, why do you feel this way? Why is this more comfortable for you to say to yourself, oh no, the data has to be wrong, these women have to be wrong, rather than, oh, this might be right and something needs to be changed?
I believe Marie just gave you a +1.
Oh, okay, great.
I absolutely agree with Illidor's statement there. So the next question, or did someone else want to tag in on that? It was mostly a question for Perrin. And this kind of, this is a question I got this morning, and I think you kind of answered it, but if you wanted to add more, please feel free, for Sanchez and Perrin, since you both did the data on these two separate really remarkable and helpful papers. Is how did you identify gender markers in the data for your study? And if you were going to do this study today, how would you code transgender individuals who have transitioned? And before I let you answer that, I did want to give a call out, which you said, and I forgot about because I'm a little ADHD. Those of you who are listening, if you can get your OP to add pronouns, that would help our data collection much, much better. Please go back to your kingdoms and back to your OP and ask if this is something they can integrate. That would be great. Going back to Perrin and Sanchez, how did you identify gender markers in the data for your study? And if you were going to do the study today, how would you code transgender individuals who have transitioned?
So I'll jump in. Oh, Perrin, you want to go first?
Well, it's different for the two different studies. So I just wanted to say for the Leaky Pipeline, it was the gender identity at the time of the award. There were transgender individuals and they told us what gender they were. So we went with that.
She also had spies.
Yes, spies.
It's true. There's also a difference between, this person was elevated and then they transitioned, or they transitioned and then they had to fight that societal impact of whether or not that happened before or after. And I imagine that would be difficult for them as a minority to handle that afterwards or before.
Well, let me just say, I couldn't tell from the data any difference between a trans woman and a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So when people give me the biology argument, I'm highly skeptical.
Sanchez.
So when we were doing the survey, in an effort to not leave any group out by accident, what we did is we actually phrased the question, do you consider yourself a minority because of your gender? Do you consider yourself a minority because of your sexual orientation or for your race or ethnicity? So we kind of took it from the other route. We basically let people say whether or not they felt like they were a minority because of that, rather than identifying specifically.
Oh, that's actually a really good point. Illidor?
So we do have a couple of questions in chat that I'm going to try and ask you to answer. And this is in regards to the Sanchez, your survey. Is there a statistical interaction between the dissatisfaction with training and minority status?
Jump in, Perrin.
I will. So once again, we were not co-segregating the variables. So there was absolutely a possibility that somebody could feel that their training wasn't being satisfied, and that coming heavily from the minority status. So we just looked at one variable at a time compared to our different outcomes. I did attempt to look at correlation between things like training and minorities, but the data was so noisy, there was no way to do that. So to do an analysis like that, I would need thousands of responses. And that simply isn't feasible with this data that we have currently. also, I would have to have more information that I couldn't possibly collect in a casual setting without, you know, starting to consider whether or not I needed to actually have a secured, you know, patient level security in place. So.
We have one more question from the audience, and that is,
one quick thing. The person who did want me to ask that question wanted to emphasize they were not coming from a turf background or anything like that. They actually wanted to make sure that we're being very respectful about people who are transitioning, and we are very inclusive, and we love our women and our folks and our AFAB and AMAP people. So yes.
that's exactly what I was going to say. They had a question, and that was, how do we capture things like the trans experience responsibly with those sets of data?
That is a fantastic question.
That's a difficult question.
It is a very difficult question, in part because a lot of those experiences should be respected by being kept, leaving it up to the trans person to figure how the public they want to be with it. And yeah,
That's an entire different panel. That's going to be another hour.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic. I mean,
that deserves some real delving.
It does.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like Perrin was saying, what part of it is the privacy of the data and making sure that you're respecting people's privacy, but also how willing are people to identify that as being trans, and not wanting to push people to do something that they're not comfortable with or not feeling safe enough to do yet, but wanting to be respectful of that. Which is why we tried to kind of do the circuitous routes by just saying whether or not you felt like you were a minority because of one of those identifiers.
That's a pretty respectful way to go about it, and you know, it's a hard thing to do, to be a public advocate, and I would definitely not force that or wish it on anyone who does not already want that role. Some people just want to be left alone to do what they live how they want to live, and I'm very respectful of that.
Yeah, and just from a sheer math standpoint, we would need more of them to be able to look at it in any sort of aggregated kind of way. So definitely something I'm keeping an open mind about going forward, because I do think it's important and relevant to support that, but you know, doing it in a way that's respectful and you know, that I can contribute to in a meaningful way. We're not ready for that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Do we have any last minute questions, Illidor? Thank you for watching the chat for me, because I can't focus on everything at once.
It looks like we don't have any yet at this time. I'm sure, though, we could do another one of these if people have more questions.
Sure. Okay, so I kind of want to give everyone a chance to give some last comments, things you wanted to say while we're all together. So if anyone here on the panel wants to jump in, Illidor has crazy eyes, so.
I just want to say how utterly impressed I am by all the women on this panel, and just how utterly amazing you all are, that you have done so much work on this. And I am just so grateful for all of your hard work and everything that you do. And please keep fighting the good fight. And I'm here for you anytime you just need me for anything. And I'm happy to be there for you. And that goes for all the women in SCA Rapier, all gender minorities in SCA Rapier. I would say heavy too, except I'm not good there. So yeah, I was good at spear for like hot minute. That's about it. But really, you guys have just been absolutely fabulous, and you guys have been doing a lot of really amazingly hard work. And I'm just so proud to be on this panel with you.
I definitely would echo that, the sheer amount of just really thoughtful work that you have done, and we appreciate this work, and we'll all continue to fight, because that's what we can do, And we'll fight as long as we can until the next generation comes along and picks up the fight and keeps going too. Marie.
Well, I saw a question flash by at the little tiny bottom of my screen where chat pops up, and it was, what would a significant improvement in numbers look like? And, you know, my first off-the-cuff reaction is to quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she said that there will be enough women on the Supreme Court when there are 9 women on the Supreme Court. But I think that in order to answer that question, really, we need to know more about how many women are participating in Rapier and combat in general. And then we know what a statistical improvement in numbers is. Is it 40% women? Is it 50% women? Our populace who consider themselves fighters, who are authorized fighter, what percentage of them are women? And that is the percentage I want us to aim at for leadership. That would be the improvement in numbers that I want to see.
And that's a good call, because awards aren't just awards, they are leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are what our society looks to for leadership.
Yep.
And so representation does really matter there. And I'd like to say that I know people, I've been banging the drum on social media about what can we do for better diversity and what can we do for you know, women and gender minorities, and I got a lot of people who were mad at me because they thought I was asking for things to be made easier because women can't try as hard, and I'm like, are you kidding me? That's absolutely not what any of us are saying. What we are saying is we want to be treated equitably. We want to be evaluated equitably. We want to be respected equitably. And no one here is looking for a gimme, right? That's definitely not what we're saying. And we are not asking awards to be cheapened, but women do belong in a place of leadership, that do belong in a place of high levels of prowess that we need to give them training to get to, and we need to support them and make sure that, okay, I'm on a rant. Perry.
So I love data. I'm going to do this real quick. So the question is, you know, what should we be shooting for? So this is a graphic from Sanchez survey that, again, is just really profoundly intuitive, because what we asked is, you know, out of peers who identifies as a minority, it's that tiny little half a meeple. And when we ask the rest of the group, you know, who identifies as a minority, it's quite a bit different, this makeup. And, you know, again, where are the meeples that are minorities ending up? Well, it's in the believing peerage is not feasible. And again, this is a self-replicating cycle. You can't be what you can't see. But statistically, you know, if you were to be like, well, how many of these colored meeples would we need to make this peerage group look like these other groups? It's twice as many. So wherever we are right now, whatever our rates are, double it, and we'll be on a really good track. So if you want a short-term goal of what it looks like to what you should be shooting for, twice of what you're doing.
Twice what we got, then keep for twice of what we got. I mean, we're looking at 13% women in the Master of Defense. So, you know, 5 years, we should see at least 26%.
Yeah.
We're looking at 2.5% women in the Order of Chivalry. Seeing 5% would be a great trend. Like, you know, I agree what that looks like. And this is a really good graphic. Thank you for sharing that.
By the way, Harvard Business Review completely agrees with you on that. About 25% is where people start to see, like, this is a place for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that is 100% correct.
Okay, Sancha, any last words?
Not really. I'm more than willing to answer any questions that people, like, if they want to do it themselves, do the survey in their own group themselves. I am more than willing to answer any questions. I'll share the questions that we use so you can at least have the starting format, and do it. Just do it. Go find the data.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Love it. All right. Well, we've run a little over. We're at about an hour and a half, so that's a good stopping point. So I do want to thank everyone for coming in. I want to thank people for submitting us some really great questions. And again, thank you, ladies, for all of the hard work you did on this research and the writing of these papers and the running of boot camps and building mentorships and making women feel empowered. That's what we want to see more of, and that's what we want to really encourage people to do. So thank you again, and good night all until next video.
Night, everybody.
Good night.